In the gilded world of high society, fortunes are built on power, but legacies are built on secrets. For one woman, the perfect life she thought she had was nothing more than an elaborate lie. This is the story of how a gilded cage was shattered, and how a woman, betrayed by those she loved most, discovered a strength she never knew she had, rising from the ashes to reclaim not just her fortune, but herself. For Olivia Harrison, the 8,000-square-foot Greenwich estate was a sanctuary. A marble and glass promise of the perfect life to come. Every night, she'd drift to sleep in a custom-made bed, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her pregnant belly, cocooned in the silent luxury of a $10 million world. She believed her husband, Spencer, was her partner in this dream. But while she slept, he was wide awake. He was just a few hundred feet away in the guest house, tangled in the sheets with her own sister, Zoe. They shared whispers not of love, but of ambition. And the biggest secret of all. The magnificent estate, the symbol of their life, wasn't his. It was a gilded cage, and the lock was about to turn. The late July heat hung thick and heavy over Greenwich, Connecticut. But inside the sprawling Davenport estate, the air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees. It was a world hermetically sealed from discomfort. A world of Palladian windows overlooking manicured lawns that rolled down to the calm, dark waters of the Long Island Sound. This was Olivia Harrison's world, though she still felt like a guest in it sometimes. She stood before one of those massive windows in the master suite, her reflection a soft silhouette against the twilight. At 7 months pregnant, her body had a new, unfamiliar gravity. She traced the curve of her stomach, a smile playing on her lips. She could feel the faint, fluttery kicks of her their son. Hers and Spencer's. Spencer. The thought of him brought a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. He was everything she had ever wanted. Handsome, driven, with a charm that could disarm even the most cynical of her father's business associates. He'd come from a modest background in Michigan, a stark contrast to her own blue-blooded upbringing, and she admired his grit, his hunger. He made her feel grounded, seen not as Olivia Davenport, the heiress, but simply as Olivia. Admiring the view, my love. Spencer's voice, smooth as single malt scotch, came from behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, his hands coming to rest over hers on her belly. He smelled of expensive cologne and the faint, crisp scent of the linen suit he'd worn to his meetings in the city. Just thinking, she murmured, leaning back against his chest. About how perfect everything is. This house, the baby, us. It is perfect, he agreed, his lips brushing her temple. And you deserve it all. But as he held her, his eyes drifted over her shoulder to the estate below. He saw the tennis courts, the infinity pool shimmering under the first evening lights, the separate 6-car garage, and the quaint, stone-walled guest house nestled amongst a grove of old oak trees. He saw $10 million of Davenport legacy. It was a constant, suffocating reminder that while he lived in this palace, he didn't own a single stone of it. The prenuptial agreement his father-in-law, Richard Davenport, had insisted upon was as ironclad as the vault in the family's downtown bank. Spencer was a salaried manager in the Davenport empire, a well-kept consort. And the gilded bars of his cage were starting to feel less like protection and more like a prison. The tension was a low hum beneath the surface of their perfect life. It surfaced in small ways. When he suggested a riskier stock investment, Olivia gently deferred to her father's financial advisor. When he wanted to replace the classic Mercedes in the garage with a flashier Lamborghini, she reminded him it was technically her mother's car. Each instance was a small paper cut to his ego. That evening, the hum grew louder. Olivia's sister, Zoe, was joining them for dinner. Zoe was the family's beautiful, volatile storm cloud. 2 years younger than Olivia, she possessed a sharp-edged glamour that made Olivia's quiet elegance seem pale in comparison. Where Olivia was soft, Zoe was flint. She drifted through art schools, dabbled in fashion design, and lived a life funded by the family trust but defined by a rebellious streak that constantly grated on their father. Dinner was served on the veranda, the tables set with heirloom silver and crystal that glittered in the candlelight. Zoe, dressed in a slinky black dress that seemed designed to defy the Connecticut dress code, swirled her wine and watched Spencer over the rim of her glass. "So, Spencer," she began, her voice a sultry drawl. "How does it feel to be lord of the manor? Must be nice to have all this space." She gestured vaguely at the sprawling grounds. "Zoe, please," Olivia sighed, a familiar note of exhaustion in her voice. "I'm just asking," Zoe said, her eyes still locked on Spencer. "It's a big step up from Grand Rapids, isn't it?" Spencer's smile didn't falter, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "It's a beautiful home. Olivia has impeccable taste," he deftly deflected, turning the compliment to his wife. "Oh, Liv has taste all right," Zoe conceded, finally looking at her sister. "She always did pick the shiniest toy in the store." The insult, veiled as it was, landed. Olivia flinched, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. She looked at Spencer, expecting him to defend her, to put Zoe in her place. But he simply took a slow sip of his water, his expression unreadable. In that moment, a tiny, cold seed of doubt was planted in Olivia's heart. She saw a flicker of something pass between her husband and her sister. A shared understanding, a glint of conspiracy that she couldn't decipher. "I'm feeling a little tired," Olivia announced, pushing her chair back. "I think I'll turn in early." Spencer was immediately by her side, the perfect, concerned husband once more. "Of course, my love. Let me help you up." As he walked her towards the grand staircase, Olivia glanced back. Zoe was still sitting at the table, a single candle illuminating her face. She raised her glass in a silent, mocking toast. Spencer didn't see it, or if he did, he gave no sign. He kissed Olivia's forehead at the top of the stairs, promising to be up in a little while. "I love you, Spence," Olivia whispered, clinging to the idea of him like a life raft. "I love you more," he replied automatically. She retreated into the cool, silent sanctuary of their bedroom, leaving him alone in the cavernous hallway. Spencer stood there for a long moment, listening to her footsteps fade. He straightened his tie, his face hardening. The performance was over. He walked back down the stairs, not towards the veranda, but towards the front door. He pulled out his phone. A new text message was waiting for him. It was from Zoe. "Guest house. 10 minutes. He typed a quick reply. "On my way." He slipped out into the humid night air, the heavy scent of night-blooming jasmine filling his lungs. In the main house, his pregnant wife drifted into a trusting sleep, dreaming of their perfect future. And in the guest house, her sister waited, ready to help him burn it all to the ground. The guest house was a miniature version of the main estate, a charming 2-bedroom cottage of fieldstone and slate. It was originally built for esteemed visitors, but for the past year, it had become Zoe's on-again, off-again residence whenever she tired of her Soho apartment. It was her private kingdom on the edge of Olivia's. Spencer didn't bother with the main door. He walked around to the back patio, the flagstones cool beneath his leather shoes. The French doors were ajar, spilling a sliver of warm, yellow light onto the manicured grass. Inside, Zoe was perched on a sleek, modern bar stool, a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses on the granite countertop before her. She'd let her hair down, and it fell in a dark cascade over the shoulders of her black dress. "Took you long enough," she said without turning around. She'd been watching his approach in the reflection of the dark window. "I had to play the part," Spencer replied, stepping inside and closing the doors behind him. The air in the guest house was different. It smelled of Zoe's expensive, musky perfume and whiskey. It smelled like rebellion. The doting husband. "It's a good look for you. A little pathetic, but good." She poured a generous measure of bourbon into each glass. "Drink?" "You know I do." He took the glass she offered, the ice clinking softly. He downed half of it in one go, the fiery liquid a welcome shock to his system. It burned away the last vestiges of the cloying, perfect life he'd left behind in the main house. "She's so oblivious," Zoe mused, tracing the rim of her glass with a blood-red nail. "Walking around in her little cashmere bubble, rubbing her belly, thinking she has it all. Does she have any idea what you're really like?" "She sees what she wants to see," Spencer said, his voice low. He walked around the counter until he was standing behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his fingers kneading the tense muscles there. "She sees the man who will give her the life she thinks she wants." Zoe leaned her head back, her hair brushing against his chest. "And what about the life you want, Spence? Is this it? Playing second fiddle to Daddy Davenport? Living off the scraps from his table, being allowed to manage one of his smaller firms like a child with a new toy?" Her words were venomous, but they were also a balm to his wounded pride. She understood. She was the only one who had ever truly seen the ravenous ambition behind his charming smile. Their connection wasn't new. It had been a slow burn, starting with flirtatious barbs at family functions, escalating to clandestine texts. And now this, a conspiracy of 2. "He doesn't respect me," Spencer admitted, the words tasting like ash. "He never has. To him, I'll always be the scholarship kid from the Midwest who got lucky." "You didn't get lucky. You got my sister," Zoe corrected him sharply. "And in doing so, you got a life sentence with Richard Davenport as your warden. He holds all the keys, Spencer. The house, the cars, the money. Your whole life is a loner." She twisted on the stool to face him, her dark eyes boring into his. "But it doesn't have to be." The air crackled with unspoken possibilities. This was their ritual. The stoking of resentments, the fanning of flames. This was the foundation of their twisted alliance. It wasn't just about sex, it was about power. They were 2 predators sizing up the same prize from different angles. "What are you suggesting, Zoe?" he asked, though he already knew. "I'm suggesting that the Davenport fortune is big enough for more than one person to have a real piece of it. Olivia is too soft to run the empire when Dad finally steps down. He knows it. He's grooming her for a life of charity balls and motherhood. But you have the killer instinct. And me," she smirked, "I have the name, and I know where all the bodies are buried, financially speaking." She stood up, closing the space between them. She reached up and loosened his tie, her fingers cool against his skin. "Together, we could be unstoppable. We could have it all. Not the loner version. The real thing." His heart was hammering in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. This was the ultimate betrayal, a treachery so profound it made his head spin. He was standing here, plotting to usurp his father-in-law with his wife's sister, while his wife slept soundly, carrying his child. A wave of guilt washed over him, so potent it almost made him step back. He saw Olivia's trusting face, her soft smile. But then he saw Richard Davenport's condescending gaze, heard his patronizing tone. He felt the suffocating weight of the prenup, the invisible walls of the gilded cage. Greed, raw and powerful, snuffed out the guilt like a candle. "And Olivia?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zoe's face hardened. "Olivia will be fine. She'll have her baby. She'll be taken care of. She always is. This isn't about her. It's about us. It's about what we deserve." She didn't need to say anything more. He leaned in and kissed her, a bruising, desperate kiss that was nothing like the gentle affection he gave Olivia. This was a kiss of shared hunger, of dark pacts and broken trusts. It was a seal on their conspiracy. He swept her into his arms and carried her towards the bedroom, leaving the 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon on the counter like evidence of a crime. And as the humid Connecticut night deepened, Spencer Harrison, the man who seemingly had everything, committed the one act of betrayal from which there could be no return. Not realizing he was just a pawn in a much larger game he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The next morning, Spencer slipped back into the main house just before dawn. He showered, the hot water failing to wash away the scent of Zoe's perfume that clung to his skin or the film of deceit that coated his soul. He dressed in a fresh suit, selected a Patek Philippe watch from his valet box, a birthday gift from Olivia, and entered the master bedroom with a tray bearing a croissant and a single white rose. Olivia was just waking up, blinking in the soft morning light. She smiled when she saw him, a pure, unguarded smile that sent a pang of something he refused to identify as guilt through his chest. "You're up early," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "Big day at the office," he lied smoothly, placing the tray on her lap. "Wanted to make sure my 2 favorite people were taken care of first." He leaned down to kiss her, but she turned her head slightly so his lips met her cheek. A small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was enough. The first thread had been pulled. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his internal alarms ringing. "Just tired," she said, her eyes not quite meeting his. "I didn't sleep well. Strange dreams." Throughout the day, a chilling quiet emanated from her. Her texts were brief, her replies to his calls monosyllabic. Spencer chalked it up to pregnancy hormones, a convenient excuse he used to soothe his own fraying nerves. He immersed himself in work at the subsidiary firm Richard had given him to run, Davenport Logistics. He moved numbers, shuffled accounts, and made a series of wire transfers to an offshore Antitia secret nest egg he'd been building for months. It was his insurance policy, his escape route if things went sour. The thrill of the deception, both financial and marital, was a potent drug. The unraveling began not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, mundane discovery. 2 days after his night with Zoe, Olivia was overseeing the weekly deep clean of the estate. Maria, the head housekeeper who had been with the Davenport family for 30 years, approached her in the library. She held a small silver object in her gloved hand. "Mrs. Harrison," Maria said, her face troubled. "I found this in the guest house, by the bed in the guest room. I do not recognize it." Olivia looked at the object. It was a custom Zippo lighter, exquisitely crafted from sterling silver. Engraved on one side was a single, stylized Z. Olivia's blood ran cold. She had seen it 100 times before. It was a one-of-a-kind piece she had commissioned for Zoe's 25th birthday from a boutique in Soho. Zoe never went anywhere without it. "Thank you, Maria," Olivia said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. I'll see that it gets back to its owner." She held the cold, heavy silver in her palm. The guest house. By the bed. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The tension at dinner, the shared glances, Zoe's taunts, Spencer's passivity, her terrible, restless sleep that night. It wasn't a strange dream, it was her subconscious screaming at her. Her first instinct was denial. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Zoe had lent it to a friend who had stayed there. Maybe she dropped it on a previous visit. But she knew. A deep, primal intuition, the same one that connected her to the child in her womb, told her the devastating truth. She didn't call Spencer. She called Zoe. "My lighter!" Zoe exclaimed when Olivia told her she'd found it. Her voice was a little too bright, a little too relieved. "I've been looking everywhere for that. I must have dropped it last week when I came by to pick up my mail. You're a lifesaver, Liv." "Last week?" Olivia asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Maria found it this morning. In the guest house bedroom. By the bed." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched for an eternity. "Well," Zoe finally said, her voice losing its breezy tone, becoming sharp and defensive. "The maids must have just gotten around to cleaning in there. You know how big that place is." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it solidified Olivia's horror into a cold, hard certainty. Maria's team was meticulous. The guest house was cleaned every Tuesday, like clockwork. "I see," Olivia said softly and hung up the phone. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, the silver lighter feeling like a branding iron in her hand. The $10 million estate no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, the setting for a grotesque play in which she was the fool. Every beautiful object, every priceless painting seemed to mock her. When Spencer came home that evening, she was waiting for him in the great room, sitting in a wingback chair, the unlit fireplace before her. The lighter was on the mantelpiece, gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. "Long day, my love?" he asked, striding in, loosening his tie. She didn't answer. She just nodded towards the mantelpiece. He followed her gaze and saw the lighter. He froze. For a fraction of a second, raw panic flashed in his eyes before the mask of calm composure slammed back into place. It was the first time she had ever seen him look truly afraid. "What's this?" he asked, his voice a strange amalgam of confusion and feigned innocence. "You tell me, Spencer," she said, her own voice unfamiliar to her ears. It was devoid of warmth, of love, of anything but a chilling emptiness. "It's Zoe's. Maria found it. In the guest house. This morning. By the bed." Spencer opened his mouth, 100 lies no doubt forming on his tongue. He would blame the maids, blame Zoe's carelessness, perhaps even try to suggest Olivia was being paranoid, hormonal. She could see the calculations whirring behind his eyes. He took a step towards her, his face a mask of practiced concern. "Liv, honey, you're jumping to conclusions. Zoe was probably just over there for some reason. You know how she is. She leaves things everywhere." "Don't," Olivia whispered, the word a blade. "Don't you dare lie to me, Don't you dare stand there in this house and treat me like an idiot. I would never, he began, reaching for her hand. You already have, she interrupted, pulling her hand away as if from a hot stove. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, and for the first time, he saw not the soft-hearted girl he had married, but a true daughter of Richard Davenport. He saw steel. I want you to tell me the truth, she said, her voice rising with a strength she didn't know she possessed. What were you doing with my sister in that guest house? Spencer stared at her, the well-rehearsed lines and charming deflections failing him completely. The thread had been pulled, and the entire perfect tapestry of his life was beginning to unravel with terrifying speed. And in his wife's cold, clear eyes, he saw that there was no weaving it back together again. The confrontation with Spencer shattered Olivia's world, but it did not break her. His denials were weak, his explanations flimsy. His attempts to gaslight her, attributing her accusations to pregnancy-induced paranoia, were so insulting they cauterized the wound of his betrayal, leaving behind not a bleeding gash, but a hard, impenetrable scar. He left for a business trip the next morning, a cowardly retreat designed to let her cool off, as he'd put it. But Olivia didn't cool off. She grew colder, clearer. The emotional tempest gave way to a chilling calm. She packed a small overnight bag, not with designer clothes, but with documents, the prenuptial agreement, recent bank statements she'd printed from their joint account, and the silver lighter, which she wrapped in a silk handkerchief. She didn't drive to a friend's house or a five-star hotel. She drove to the one place she knew the truth was valued above all else, her father's penthouse on Fifth Avenue. Richard Davenport was a formidable man, built of the same granite and steel as the skyscrapers he financed. He'd built his empire from a modest inheritance into a global powerhouse. He was 70 years old, with eyes that missed nothing and a mind that was always 3 moves ahead. When his daughter arrived unannounced, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a storm, he cancelled his afternoon meetings without a second thought. He listened in his study, a room of dark wood, leather, and the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock. He listened without interruption as Olivia laid out the story, her voice steady and devoid of tears. She told him about the dinner, the tension, Zoe's taunts, and Spencer's passivity. She placed the silver lighter on his vast mahogany desk. She recounted her phone call with Zoe and the subsequent, pathetic confrontation with Spencer. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Richard stared at the lighter, his expression unreadable. Olivia had expected anger, perhaps a thundering rage on her behalf. Instead, he seemed resigned, disappointed, but not surprised. I am sorry, Olivia, he said, his voice a low rumble. I am truly sorry that you have been hurt so profoundly. No daughter of mine deserves this. He finally looked up at her, and his eyes were filled not with rage, but with a deep, sorrowful wisdom. But I cannot say I am shocked. Olivia felt a jolt. What do you mean? You knew. I suspected, Richard corrected her gently. I have always had my reservations about Spencer. He's too polished, too eager. A man that hungry is rarely satisfied with what he is given. He always wants more. He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the river of yellow cabs flowing along the avenue. Love can be blinding, my dear. I saw how happy he made you, and I hoped my instincts were wrong. I truly did. But a man like me doesn't build an empire on hope. He builds it on due diligence. He turned back from the window, his face set like stone. I never stopped doing my due diligence on Spencer Harrison. This was the first twist of the knife for Olivia. Her father had been investigating her husband. When I gave him control of Davenport Logistics, Richard continued, it wasn't just a generous wedding gift. It was a test. A very long, very complex, and very well-monitored test. I gave him enough rope to see if he would build a ladder or hang himself with it. He walked to his desk and unlocked a drawer with a small brass key. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder and placed it before her. He chose to hang himself. Olivia opened the folder, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just about Zoe. That was merely the sordid, emotional icing on a cake of calculated financial treason. The folder was filled with reports from a top-tier private investigative firm. There were photographs, grainy, long-lens shots of Spencer meeting Zoe not just at the guest house, but at discreet city bars and boutique hotels for months. Their affair wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a sustained campaign. But that was just the first section. The second part was far worse. It contained detailed financial forensics, flowcharts, and bank records that tracked a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. The investigator had uncovered Spencer's secret insurance policy. He had been systematically embezzling funds from Davenport Logistics, siphoning off hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past year. He wasn't just cheating on Olivia, he was stealing from her family. He was trying to build his own war chest with their money. He was planning to leave you, Richard said, his voice flat and cold. This wasn't a crime of passion, Olivia. It was a business plan. He and Zoe. They were plotting a takeover of sorts. He thought he could bleed the logistics company dry, build his own capital, and then, I suspect, leverage his position as your husband and the father of my grandchild to demand a greater role, a greater share. The affair with your sister was just leverage. A way to isolate you, perhaps. A partner in his palace coup. Olivia felt sick. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more calculated than she could have ever imagined. She wasn't just a cheated-on wife. She was a mark, a stepping stone. Her pregnancy, her love, her trust, they were all just assets for him to exploit. And the house, she whispered, looking up at her father, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Richard gave a grim, mirthless smile. Also a test. The deed, the trust it's held in. It's all tied directly to the prenuptial agreement. An agreement which, as you know, contains an exceptionally strict infidelity clause. The moment he was unfaithful, he forfeited any and all claim to any community property. Not that there was much to begin with. The moment he stole from my company, he committed fraud. The estate was never his. It was bait. And he and your sister took it. He closed the folder, the sound echoing in the silent room like a gavel. He thinks he's on a business trip, cooling his heels, Richard said, his eyes now glinting with the cold fire of a predator about to strike. He has no idea that the game is already over. And he has lost. Olivia looked at her father, truly seeing the depth of his strategic mind for the first time. He hadn't been a passive, disapproving observer. He had been a silent puppeteer, allowing the players to move, knowing all along that he held every string. The patriarch's gambit was complete. Now, all that remained was the checkmate. Spencer Harrison returned from his self-imposed exile 2 days later, feeling confident. He'd given Olivia space. He'd concocted a series of plausible, overlapping lies to explain the lighter. He'd even bought a ridiculously expensive diamond bracelet as a peace offering. He envisioned a tearful reconciliation where he would admit to being thoughtless, but not unfaithful, and she, emotional and pregnant, would eventually relent. He strolled into the main house that afternoon, whistling, the velvet box heavy in his pocket. The house was unnervingly quiet. He found Olivia not in their bedroom, but in the formal drawing room, a cavernous space reserved for major holidays and her father's most important guests. She was sitting on a brocade sofa, dressed in a simple but elegant navy dress. She was the picture of composure. Across from her, in one of the high-backed armchairs, sat Richard Davenport. His presence hit Spencer like a physical blow. "Richard," Spencer said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise. I didn't know you were coming over." "Sit down, Spencer," Richard said. His voice was not angry, but it held a chilling lack of warmth. It was the voice he used in a boardroom just before dismantling a rival company. Spencer's confidence began to evaporate. He looked at Olivia, but her face was a beautiful, cold mask. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Just as he was about to sit, a side door opened and Zoe walked in. She looked nervous, her usual defiant glamour replaced by a brittle anxiety. She shot a panicked glance at Spencer before taking a seat at the far end of the room, as far from her sister as possible. "A family meeting, I see," Spencer attempted, his voice a little too loud in the silent room. "What's the occasion?" "The occasion," Richard began, leaning forward slightly, "is the end of a charade." He gestured to the large mahogany coffee table. On it, fanned out like a losing poker hand, were photographs. The first one Spencer saw was a crystal-clear image of him and Zoe kissing on the patio of the guest house. Another showed them entering a hotel in Midtown. Another, and another. Spencer's blood turned to ice water. "Where did you get these?" he stammered, his mind racing. "Let's call it quality control," Richard said flatly. He then slid a second set of documents across the table. Bank statements from a bank in the Cayman Islands. Wire transfer confirmations. A detailed breakdown of the shell corporation Spencer had so carefully constructed. And this. Let's call it an audit. Spencer stared at the proof of his embezzlement laid bare on the table. There was no denying it. It was all there. Every stolen dollar, every secret transaction. The floor fell out from under him. He was exposed, utterly and completely. He looked at Zoe, a desperate, silent plea for an ally. But she was staring at the financial documents, her face pale with shock. She had known about the affair. She had encouraged the ambition. But she clearly had not known the extent of his financial crimes. She realized in that moment that he was just as willing to deceive her as he was Olivia. I can explain," Spencer began, the words catching in his throat. This was a nightmare. He was supposed to be in control. "No, you can't," Olivia said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clear and strong, resonating with an authority he had never heard from her before. "There is no explanation for this. There is only the truth. You married me under false pretenses. You betrayed my trust. You betrayed our vows. And you stole from my family. You plotted with my own sister against me while I was carrying your child." She stood up, her pregnancy no longer a sign of vulnerability but a symbol of the future he had just forfeited. "The man I thought I loved never existed. He was a fiction you created to get your hands on all of this." She swept her arm, indicating the opulent room. "But you misunderstood something crucial, Spencer. You don't get this. You were never going to get this." It was then that Zoe, realizing she had been played by everyone, finally broke. She shot to her feet, her face contorted with fury, not at her father or her sister, but at Spencer. "You told me it was about us," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You told me we were going to build something together. You didn't tell me you were just a common thief. You used me. You used me to get to her, to get to him." "That's not true." Spencer fired back, his desperation making him reckless. "This was your idea as much as mine. You hated her perfect life. You wanted to see her fall." The ugly truth of their conspiracy filled the room, a poison gas of jealousy and greed. They tore into each other, hurling accusations, revealing the petty resentments and ruthless ambitions that had fueled their affair. Olivia and Richard watched the implosion in silence, their expressions a mixture of disgust and vindication. Finally, Richard stood, and the sheer force of his presence silenced them both. "Enough," he commanded. "The time for lies is over." He turned his cold gaze on Spencer. "Your employment at Davenport Logistics is terminated, effective immediately. A team is at the office right now securing your files. A full criminal complaint for fraud and embezzlement will be filed with the district attorney's office on Monday morning. I suggest you find a very good lawyer." He then looked at Zoe, and for the first time, a flicker of pain crossed his features. "As for you, Zoe, you conspired against your own flesh and blood. You are a disgrace to this family's name. Your trust fund will be frozen. You are no longer welcome in this house or in any of my properties. You are, for all intents and purposes, on your own. Perhaps you will finally learn the value of something you didn't inherit." Zoe stared at him, aghast, before her face crumpled in defeat. Richard's final gaze fell upon Spencer, who stood shaking in the middle of the room. Two large, impassive men in dark suits suddenly entered from the hall. "My security will escort you to your room," Richard stated. "You will pack one bag with your personal effects. Anything you acquired after your marriage to my daughter will remain. You will then be escorted off this property. If you ever attempt to contact Olivia or my family again, I will use the full weight of my resources to ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life regretting it. Now get out of my house." The reckoning was swift, brutal, and absolute. Spencer Harrison, the man who flew too close to the sun, was cast out. He was no longer the lord of the manor but a trespasser being evicted with nothing to his name but a bag of clothes and the promise of a prison cell. He was led away, not even daring to look back at the woman whose life he had so carelessly tried to destroy. The months that followed the reckoning were a quiet reconstruction. The lawsuit against Spencer moved forward with the relentless, grinding efficiency of the Davenport legal machine. Stripped of his ill-gotten funds and abandoned by anyone of influence, he was a pariah. His name appeared in the business pages not as a rising star, but as a cautionary tale of fraud and disgrace. The last Olivia heard, he had accepted a plea bargain to avoid a longer sentence. His future was a bleak landscape of courtrooms and restitution payments. Zoe vanished. Cut off from the family fortune, she disappeared into the anonymity of the world she had always pretended to embrace. There were whispers she was somewhere in Europe, trying to leverage old contacts. But the Davenport name, once her golden ticket, was now a door slammed shut in her face. She had wanted to be free of her family's shadow, and in the cruelest of ironies, she had gotten her wish. For Olivia, healing was not a single event but a slow, daily process. In the late fall, as the leaves on the estate turned to fire and gold, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Andrew, after her maternal grandfather, a man of quiet integrity. Holding her son in the sun-drenched nursery that had once been a symbol of a shared dream, Olivia felt a profound shift. The magnificent house no longer felt like a gilded cage or a stage for betrayal. It felt like home. Her home. Her son's birthright. The walls, once silent witnesses to her pain, now seemed to stand as ramparts protecting her and the new life she held. Her father was a constant, gentle presence. He visited several times a week, not as Richard Davenport, the titan of industry, but as Grandpa Richard. He would hold Andrew, his formidable face softening as the baby's tiny hand curled around his finger. He never spoke of Spencer or Zoe unless Olivia brought them up. He was focused on the future, on the new Davenport heir. One crisp afternoon, as she and her father walked the grounds, pushing Andrew in his stroller, Olivia stopped and looked back at the great house. "I used to feel so small here," she confessed, her voice soft. "Like I was just a temporary resident, like none of it was really mine." "And now?" Richard asked, his eyes on her face. "Now," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips, "I know it is. Not because of the deed or the trust, but because this is my son's legacy. It's my responsibility to protect it, to fill it with strength and honesty, not secrets and lies." She had learned a brutal lesson, that the greatest betrayals often come from those closest to us, cloaked in smiles and promises. But from the ashes of that betrayal, she had found a strength she never knew she possessed. She was no longer the naive girl who had fallen for a charming facade. She was a mother. She was a survivor. She was the matriarch of the house, not by marriage, but by right. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house stood proud and strong against the twilight sky. It was a $10 million estate, a symbol of immense wealth and power. But for the first time, Olivia understood its true value. It wasn't in the marble or the manicured lawns. It was in the promise of a different dawn, a future she would build herself, for herself and for her son, on a foundation of unbreakable truth. 3 years passed. On the surface, the world of the Greenwich estate was one of idyllic tranquility. The seasons turned, painting the lush grounds in hues of vibrant green, fiery orange, and serene white. Andrew was now a boisterous 3-year-old with his mother's bright eyes and a boundless energy that filled the great house with laughter, chasing away the last of the stubborn ghosts. Olivia had settled into her role with a grace and competence that surprised everyone but her father. She managed her inheritance, sat on the boards of 2 prominent children's charities, and most importantly, she was a present and devoted mother. The scar of Spencer's betrayal had faded, no longer an aching wound, but a silvery reminder of the strength she had discovered in its wake. The story was, by all accounts, over. But the past is never truly gone. It is merely patient. The echo arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a plain, cream-colored envelope, addressed not to the estate, but to the administrative office of one of her charities. It was a formal letter from the social work department of St. Jude's Public Hospital in the Bronx. The language was sterile, bureaucratic. It informed her that a patient, Miss Zoe Davenport, had been admitted in critical condition. She had listed Olivia as her next of kin. She was alone, and her prognosis was terminal. Olivia read the letter 3 times, the clinical words blurring into a nauseating haze. Zoe. The name was a specter from another life. After the reckoning, Olivia had willfully and successfully purged her sister from her thoughts. To hear her name again, attached to words like critical and terminal, sent a disorienting shock through her system. The sterile hospital notice felt more violent than a scream. She immediately called her father. Richard's response was exactly what she expected, pragmatic, protective, and utterly devoid of sentiment. "Leave it alone, Olivia," he advised, his voice firm over the phone. "Send the hospital's administrator an anonymous donation for her care if you must. But do not go there. Do not see her. She is not your responsibility. She forfeited that right 3 years ago. She's dying, Dad. And she's alone." "She made herself alone," Richard countered, his tone hardening. "This is the consequence of her choices. Do not mistake this for anything other than what it is, a final, desperate gambit. She wants something. Forgiveness, money, a scene. Don't allow her to poison your peace. Not after you've worked so hard to build it." A few years ago, Olivia would have agreed, deferring to his wisdom. But the woman her father was speaking to was not the same woman who had run to his penthouse seeking refuge. That woman was gone. "This isn't about what she wants," Olivia said, her voice quiet but resolute. "This is about what I need to do. I can't let her die like that, in a public ward, with no one. It's not who I am. It is who she made you become," he argued. "Smarter, stronger, and more careful. And more compassionate, I hope," Olivia added softly. "I have to go, Dad. For me, not for her." The silence on the other end of the line was long, but when he spoke again, the steel in his voice had been replaced by a reluctant understanding. "Your security detail will go with you to the door. Not a step farther without your express permission. Call me the moment you leave." The drive to the Bronx was a journey across worlds. The manicured perfection of Greenwich dissolved into the grit and relentless motion of the city. St. Jude's was a large, aging brick building, its halls humming with a weary, perpetual motion. The air smelled of antiseptic and quiet suffering. It was the complete antithesis of the curated, silent luxury of the Davenport estate. Zoe was in a semi-private room at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The woman in the bed bore only a passing resemblance to the sharp, glamorous sister Olivia remembered. The vibrant dark hair was gone, replaced by a sparse, patchy down. Her skin, once glowing with expensive treatments, was sallow and stretched thin over her bones. The only thing that remained of the old Zoe was in her eyes. When they flickered open and saw Olivia standing in the doorway, they still held a glint of their old, defiant fire, now banked by pain and exhaustion. "So," Zoe rasped, a dry, rattling sound, "the queen descends from her castle to visit the dungeon." Olivia stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. She pulled a visitor's chair to the bedside, the legs scraping noisily on the linoleum. "The social worker called me, Zoe. They said you were dying," Zoe finished the sentence for her, a grim smirk twisting her lips. "Don't be shy, Liv. We're past pretending now, aren't we? Pancreatic." By the time they found it, it had already bought real estate everywhere else. They sat in an uncomfortable silence, the beeping of a machine the only sound. Olivia didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," felt hollow. "I forgive you," felt like a lie. "Why did you call me?" Olivia finally asked. Zoe's gaze drifted to the grimy window, which offered a view of a brick wall. "I ran out of money about a year ago. Ran out of friends 6 months after that. Turns out the Davenport name is only useful when it's attached to a bank account. I came back here thinking. I don't know what I was thinking. I got sick. And when they ask you who your emergency contact is, you start thinking about the people you're actually connected to by blood, whether you like it or not. She turned her head on the pillow, her eyes pinning Olivia with a startling intensity. I didn't call you for your money, Olivia, or your pity. I called you because there's one last piece of the story you don't know. One last debt I owe you. I don't want anything from you, Zoe. You'll want this, Zoe insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. It's about him. About Spencer. She coughed, a deep, painful spasm that shook her frail body. When she recovered, she continued, after it all went down, I was adrift and angry. Angry at you, at Dad, but most of all at him. He played me just as much as he played you. So I started digging. Hired a cheap PI with the last of my money. I wanted something to destroy him with, something more than what Dad already had. Olivia felt a cold dread creep up her spine. What did you find? You think Spencer started his life when he got that scholarship to Michigan State? That he was just some ambitious kid from a working-class family? Zoe gave a weak, rattling laugh. That was Act 2. His whole life before that. He burned it to the ground. He had a different name. Scott Peterson. And he wasn't just some kid. He was a husband. And a father. The words hit Olivia with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. Spencer. A father before Andrew. In a little town outside of Ann Arbor, Zoe whispered, her energy fading fast. A wife named Sarah, a daughter named Molly. He drained their savings, took out loans in her name, and then he just vanished. Changed his name, created a new identity, and went looking for a bigger prize. He didn't just climb the ladder, live. He built it out of the bones of the people he left behind. With a trembling hand, Zoe reached under her pillow and pulled out a crumpled, worn envelope. She pushed it across the blanket towards Olivia. It's all in there, she breathed, exhausted from the effort. Her name, the town, a picture of the girl. I held on to it, thinking maybe I'd use it someday. But it's no use to me now. It's a debt. The truth. It's the only thing I have left to give you. He wasn't just a bad husband to you. He was never a husband at all. He's a black hole. He consumes everything. Olivia stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. This new betrayal was somehow worse than the affair, worse than the embezzlement. It was a complete negation of the man she thought she knew, revealing the hollow, sociopathic core beneath. He hadn't just deceived her, he was a phantom, a construct. She finally looked at Zoe, and for the first time, she felt a wave of profound, aching pity. Her sister's entire life had been a furious, desperate reaction to the golden cage she was born into. She had attached herself to a man who was the human embodiment of a lie, and he had destroyed her as casually as he destroyed everyone else. Olivia stood up. She didn't take the envelope yet. She walked to the door and spoke quietly to the security guard outside. She made a call to her father's personal physician, giving quiet, clear instructions. Arrangements were to be made. A private room in a top-tier palliative care facility. The best comfort care money could buy, all paid for anonymously. It was not an act of forgiveness. It was an act of closure, an obligation not of a sister, but of a human being to ensure another did not die alone in a place like this. When she returned to the room, she picked up the envelope from the bed. Zoe watched her, her eyes wet with tears she was too weak to shed. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Olivia walked out of the hospital and into the fresh, cool air of the late afternoon, the envelope clutched in her hand. Back at the estate, she found Andrew playing on the great lawn with his nanny, his delighted shrieks echoing in the twilight. She watched him, her beautiful, innocent son who shared the blood of a monster. But looking at him, she knew Spencer's legacy wasn't blood. It was a pattern of erasure and deceit, and that was a pattern that would end with her. She held the envelope, the full and terrible truth of her past in one hand. With the other, she would guide her son toward a future of honesty and light. The knowledge didn't weaken her, it armed her. It was the final ghost, and now she had the power to banish it forever. Years later, the great lawn of the Davenport estate was filled not with hushed whispers of scandal, but with the bright, joyful sounds of a child's birthday party. Olivia, watching Andrew blow out the candles on his cake, caught her father's eye across the garden. There was no pain left in her smile, only a deep, earned peace. She had learned that a true foundation isn't built of stone and marble, but of truth and love. And here, in the heart of her magnificent home, surrounded by genuine laughter, she had finally built a life that was truly, unshakably her own. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about avoiding the storm, but about learning to rebuild in its wake. She faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged not broken, but stronger, transforming her pain into purpose and her house into a true home. What would you have done in Olivia's shoes? Could you have seen the warning signs? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Every family has its secrets, and stories like this remind us that true wealth is never about money, but about trust and integrity. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story of justice and resilience. And make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life dramas that will leave you thinking long after the story ends.